It's Amanda again. Welcome to part 2 of the 2023 Farm Bill video. This might be a lengthy one, so I appreciate your patience. This portion of the video will focus on the curated recommendations from 5 main platforms. I will discuss the platforms in the next slide. The recommendations were chosen as they may have the largest impact on the regional food system in a positive way. Let's first discuss how we researched and curated the recommendations. I know I've said this before, but I will cover the recommendations later on in this presentation. First, I want to discuss the process of curating said recommendations. The Food Policy Council did not want to reinvent the wheel by coming up with our own recommendations. Instead, we wanted to spotlight food and farming organizations that spend hours building their platforms. The Food Policy Council can best support other organizations' advocacy around the Farm Bill by highlighting how their nationally focused platforms can impact our regional food system in Greater Cincinnati. The highlighted recommendations are marked with the organization that provided the recommendation. Each platform is symbolized by a picture, as shown in the key on this slide. For today, I spotlighted 5 platforms. The platforms are the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, or NSAC, the American Farmland Trust, our state partner in Kentucky, the Community Farm Alliance, or CFA, our other Kentucky state partner, Kentucky Food Action Network, or KFAN, and recommendations from the local food marker bill potentially submitted by Senator Sherrod Brown's office. I want to make the note that the local marker bill has yet to be submitted by the time this presentation was recorded. Wes King, the agricultural advisor for Senator Brown, has provided enough detail during public meetings and presentations to speculate the marker bill's general recommendations. However, some of the information is speculation and based on the 2018 Farm Bill recommendations Senator Brown has submitted. The specifics of the marker bill are not yet known until publication. In addition, some of you may be familiar with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, or OFA. OFA aligns its specific recommendations primarily with NSAC. However, you can read the 5 OFA priorities on their website, and I will also share their 2-pager in the resource page of this presentation. After reading through the 5 platforms mentioned in this slide, 4 recommendations for each title were chosen. We did not include the trade title since it is beyond the scope of the Regional Food Policy Council. In some of the titles, the inclusion of the recommendations was based on the impact of the recommendation on the regional area of the Food Policy Council, while other recommendations included have a wider scope due to their complexity and application across many titles. I'm finally going to discuss the recommendations I've been talking about. As you may recall, Title 1 focuses on commodities. The commodity title defines what commodity crops are and the allowable resources, land, and equipment that supports their crop growth. Commodity programs subsidize land, resources, and equipment that grow commodity crops. If you want a more in-depth definition, please look at our definitions 3-pager. It is found on the resource page of this presentation. Subsidies also exist for programs like conservation and specialty crops. However, subsidies for these programs are typically less than commodity programs, though it is based on market pricing. Current commodity subsidy programs support an agricultural system with acres dedicated to monocultures of crops that are either feeding animals, becoming fuel, or becoming highly processed ingredients. The current structure also demonstrates the intertwining between commodities, crop insurance, and credit. Crop insurance and credit will be discussed in later slides. Commodity crops are typically classified as low-risk crops with high production rates for a variety of reasons, so crop insurance and credit assessments tend to support growing commodity crops for those reasons. Significant changes in the commodity and subsidy programs will not likely happen in 2023. If we are being realistic. However, if recommendations don't continue to be suggested, then momentum stops. I'm only going to read the bold recommendation at the top of each text box. I am not reading the recommendation's description during this presentation, so please feel free to pause at any time to read the descriptions. I'm also going to provide additional background information that is not written on the slide for each recommendation. The recommendations for the commodity title include Recommendation 1, create payment limitations for landowners. This recommendation is supported by NSAC. To give you a little bit more background information, landowners can receive subsidy payments for their farmland even if they do not work their land directly, as long as they are actively engaged in the farmland. You can use the definition sheet for more information on that classification. Multiple individuals can claim subsidies for the same land, and their employees and or renters are not guaranteed to receive portions of these subsidy payments. Recommendation 2. Increase financial opportunities, which is supported by American Farmland Trust and CFA. Financing opportunities under this title and others are not equitably accessible. Financial resources that are more readily accessible to commodity crop growers should be expanded so they are more accessible to farmers growing specialty crops and/or farmers making conservation efforts on their farmland. I'm going to combine the background information of recommendations 3 and 4 together. The recommendations are 3. Authorize local and state protection plans. Recommendation 4. Improve farmland safety nets. A variation of one of these recommendations is supported by the American Farmland Trust, NSAC, and CFA. Both recommendations require subsidies to expand payment outs for production, land, and resources dedicated to conservation practices and specialty crops. Also, conservation subsidies must be consistently competitive with commodity subsidies to encourage landowners to direct resources towards conservation. So now let's discuss Title II, Conservation. Title II of the Farm Bill covers conservation. In this slide and in others, we use several acronyms. The definition sheet will be helpful to ease some of the confusion, so please use it as we dive in. The National Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, manages most conservation programs within the USDA. Some programs, like conservation land easement programs, are not managed by NRCS, however. NSAC supports a version of all recommendations on this slide, and several of their recommendations from other titles emphasize how the recommendations also support conservation. Taking the opportunity to spotlight other agricultural platforms offers ideas on how recommendations can be implemented at the regional level. This is why NSAC is not mentioned on this particular slide. So, Recommendation 1. Increase accessibility to NRCS programs. This recommendation is supported by American Farmland Trust. This recommendation is similar to Recommendation 4 on this slide, but it differs because it focuses on NRCS programs specifically. It also provides a solution rooted in the region, city, or county. The USDA could be directed to create a community-based navigator program that supports farmers through the complexity of conservation programs and other USDA programs. A community-based navigator program, or something similar, is mentioned on other slides too. Recommendation 2. instruct USDA to monitor EQIP equitably. This is supported by CFA and the American Farmland Trust. The Farm Bill can only provide instruction and directives to the USDA and its programs. As we mentioned in video 1, the USDA has its own rulemaking process that interprets and implements the instruction directives from the Farm Bill. The Environmental Quality Improvement Program, or EQIP, has its own subsidy program, but both EQIP and its subsidy program are misused as shown by data released by the USDA. Plus, the payouts need to be aligned with the actual costs of conservation practices. Estimated costs are set lower than actual costs. The alignment of estimated costs with actual costs would make the program more competitive compared to the commodity subsidy program. Cost adjustments could be on a sliding scale based on the region if applicable. Recommendation 3. Decrease barriers to conservation easement programs. This recommendation is supported by the American Farmland Trust. Historically, USDA programs require a lot of administrative effort from the applicant to apply, and also to report after approval. The administrative burden of managing land under the land easement programs is particularly tricky for small to medium farms. In addition, the adjusted gross income requirements make it difficult for beginning farmers to apply. Finally, recommendation 4. Expand access to all conservation programs outside the NRCS. This recommendation is supported by CFA. If done thoughtfully and with regional ecosystems in mind, grounding conservation efforts in proven practices might benefit regionally focused conservation efforts while potentially supporting more research opportunities in conservation. National recommendations are not equally applicable to different states. Think about the differences between the state of Florida versus the state of Ohio versus the state of Minnesota. Proven practices could be guided by farmers, which allows farmer autonomy. Plus, farming practices could be more culturally relevant to the identity of the farmer. So, collaboration with research extension offices can be a vital tool in advocating for more regionally focused research and education. Let's go on to the next slide. Let's discuss the nutrition title. As I mentioned in a previous slide, the recommendations are speculative when we spotlight Senator Brown's local market marker bill. I mention this because the bill appears in this slide too. The nutrition title received over 70% of the budget from the 2018 Farm Bill, and it is predicted an equivalent amount or even potentially more will be allocated to the nutrition title in the 2023 Farm Bill. As I said before, you can pause to read the descriptions of the recommendations, as I am continuing to not read the full descriptions. So let's get on to recommendation 1. Recommendation 1 is nutrition incentives should be earmarked for community-based food centers, which was brought to Senator Brown's attention from regional local market experts. This topic was brought up during a few meetings with representatives from Senator Brown's office, in particular by farmers market managers. However, this idea might support the work of nonprofit or co-op grocery stores and feeding programs in the region. The recommendation would decentralize some of the nutrition incentive programs so they can better support local farm-to-consumer supply chains. The incentives might be better distributed among communities that need them the most while supporting local markets and food hubs like farmers markets. Additional advocacy at the county level can occur after the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, especially for programs like the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which is managed by the county in the state of Ohio. Recommendation 2, eliminate or reduce grant matching for GusNIP grants. This is supported by NSAC. This topic was also brought up during a few meetings with representatives from Senator Brown's office, particularly when discussing any USDA grant program, but it is applicable to grants under the nutrition title too. The need to make USDA program grants more accessible to smaller organizations appears to be a common thing, doesn't it? The substantial matching requirements for GusNIP grants make it difficult for small organizations with smaller budgets to apply for GusNIP funding. Removing or reducing this obstacle can provide opportunities within the region. Recommendation 3. Increase funding for Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program and other nutrition incentive programs. This is supported by KFAN. Simply put, SNAP, Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, and other nutrition incentive programs are oversaturated and cannot meet the needs of people who utilize the programs. For example, there have been major repercussions for families who utilize SNAP after COVID emergency allotments ended in Ohio and Kentucky during the past couple of months. Until long-term food access solutions are found and implemented, additional funding is needed for these programs. Finally, recommendation 4, direct a shift to an electronic-based incentive system. This is supported by KFAN. However, this is something the Food Policy Council is helping with at the regional level. The last recommendation is aligned with the work of the Food Policy Council, since we provided funding as a subgrant. The money went to the Ohio Farmers Market Network and Produce Perks Midwest. They are researching what it would take for the Southwest Ohio Farmers Market to shift to an electronic-based incentive system, where recipients of any nutrition incentive have an Apple Pay-like program on their phone, and they can pay for food under easy-to-use electronic umbrella. This is more of a challenge when trying to include WIC coupons, since WIC is overseen by another department and federal package. There would also be a need of coordination among the state and county departments that manage the program day to day for each state. The technological infrastructure must change through directives from the USDA and its Food and Nutrition Services to make this happen. Still, it is nice to see other states pushing to transform the nutrition incentive system to make it easier to administer at local markets. Let's go on to the next slide. Talking about loans and credit isn't the most interesting topic. Who likes talking about their mortgage or business loan? However, credit is vitally important for anyone to get their business started. The Farm Bill regulates agricultural loan programs and what is available to farmers. Though private sectors can provide agriculture-specific business loans, the USDA acts as a model for private insurers. And a lot of private insurers request permission for their loan and credit services. Recently, an NPR article came out where they analyzed USDA loan data from 2022. From that data, they found that Black farmers have the lowest acceptance rates and one of the highest withdrawal rates for USDA loans. This demonstrates something we already knew, unfortunately. Historically marginalized farmer populations, whether it's based on being a BIPOC farmer, a beginning or military veteran farmer, or a migrant farmer, find it challenging to access credit and loan opportunities. In addition, both private and USDA lenders report limited trading on both innovative farm business models and implicit bias awareness, which disproportionately affects BIPOC farmers. Hopefully, some of these recommendations on this slide can provide support for underserved farming populations. Recommendation 1 is increase lending opportunities for underserved populations. This is supported by CFA, American Farmland Trust, and ANZAC. Several programs and resources can be implemented or improved to increase lending opportunities. This should be applied to both USDA loaning and private lending services. I'm going to combine background information for recommendations 2 and 3 together. Recommendation 2 is to create a regional investment partnership program, and recommendation 3 is to create a sustainable investment fund. Both recommendations are supported by NSAC. Creating a regional investment partnership program would allow nonprofits and/or businesses to support innovative farming business models that support the region's needs. A similar opportunity would exist if a sustainable investment fund was created, especially if managed at the state or county level. Creating a sustainable investment fund could also help to bypass some of the internal issues with risk assessments. This leads us to recommendation 4, which is to reframe market and risk assessments, which is supported by CFA, the American Farmland Trust, and NSAC. As mentioned in the commodity title, credit programs are interlinked with commodity subsidy programs and crop insurance. One of the many things that links these programs together is the market and risk assessments. The current assessments need to be reframed to include beginning farmers' innovative business models in an otherwise aging population, the required changes in adapting and mitigating to climate change, and the inclusion of specialty crops. Let's discuss rural development. The Food Policy Council is expanding how it supports rural development so rural farmland can thrive in the ever-changing landscape. In the past, the Food Policy Council has not as effectively represented the several rural counties in our region as we could have. We need to look outside the scope of the city limits so we can represent the entire regional food system within our 10 counties. Recommendation 1 is to increase funding for rural development and assistance. This is supported by NSAC. This recommendation is relatively straightforward, but elements of this recommendation aligns with some of the recommendations from the credit title in the previous slide. Funding could come in the form of credit and loan opportunities. Recommendation 2 is to update REAP so it becomes REAP 3.0. This is supported by the American Farmland Trust, but was first presented by the Environmental Law and Policy Center to Congress during a hearing in the summer of 2022. This recommendation is extensive and could be its own video. REAP 3.0 doesn't exist as a program, but rather is an ideation presented to the Congressional Committees on Agriculture as the future of REAP. REAP stands for Rural Energy for America program and has been a successful program that leverages clean energy for rural development. The additional expansion that the Environmental Law and Policy Center is calling for includes funds, technical assistance, and infrastructural support, especially in the light of President Biden's American Jobs Plan and the resulting Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Recommendation 3 is to label farmers markets as critical infrastructure. This idea was presented to Senator Brown's staff by some of the farmers market managers in our region. The agriculture system as a whole is defined as critical infrastructure, but some key portions of the food system are not explicitly included under the label. Farmers markets are just one marketplace type that could be considered critical infrastructure. Though this recommendation was presented by farmers market managers, we don't have to limit this recommendation to only farmers markets. The change to include local and regional direct-to-consumer and direct-to-wholesaler marketplaces under the critical infrastructure label may lead to more regionalization of the agricultural systems, since more marketplaces could exist locally. Recommendation 4 is to increase technical assistance in rural areas. This is supported by the American Farmland Trust and NSAC. As additional technological innovations or clean energy are installed, training and assistance are required for existing and beginning farmers in rural areas. Without technical assistance and training, the improvement of REAP and other rural development programs would only expand so far because it would be limited to people who know the programs. Let's discuss research and education in the next slide. Most organizations we spotlight in this presentation emphasize regenerative and/or sustainable agriculture practices as part of their work. This means that most recommendations on this slide focus on sustainable and regenerative agriculture research. Sustainable agriculture systems are aligned with our mission to build a resilient regional food system. So this emphasis on regenerative or sustainable agriculture research is fine with us. In addition, the work of county and state extension offices is an opportunity to bring the federal directives that guide research and educational opportunities into the local and regional areas. Additional advocacy can be accomplished within our counties to support sustainable agriculture research directives that come through the Farm Bill this year. Recommendation 1 is to prioritize research that focuses on soil health. This is supported by NSAC. We want to include growing practices of hydroponics, aeroponics, and other innovative farm practices, of course. However, we can better support additional research on soil health. As the Food Policy Council focuses more on food waste management, research opportunities could include composting practices too. Recommendation 2 is to expand outreach about current research. This is supported by CFA. Extension offices, research services conducted by the National Institution on Food and Agriculture, and research services conducted by the Agriculture Research Service can better collaborate in educating farmers and growers on the research results and best practices. Providing tools to adopt regenerative and sustainable practices is vital, since a significant burden is knowing what to do when first starting the process. With data from the National Institution on Food and Agriculture and the Agriculture Research Service, extension offices can bridge the gap and provide more assistance than they already do. However, extension offices need money for outreach to do so. So hopefully more funding can be directed into research and education from the Farm Bill. I am going to combine the background information for recommendations 3 and 4 together. Recommendation 3 is to prioritize research by BIPOC farmers, and recommendation 4 is to establish additional areas of study for 1890 centers of excellence. Like with many other USDA programs, it is challenging for BIPOC and other historically marginalized farmers to access resources like money, technical assistance, or outreach. This includes resources from the National Institution on Food and Agriculture, the Agriculture Research Service, and extension offices. Increasing opportunities for historically marginalized farmers to participate in research, extension, education, and other related matters could, in exchange, expand the available information and data. Extension offices can only report on the available research, so the representation of BIPOC-led agriculture efforts could provide more data that might be more culturally relevant to a wider range of farmers. Also, expanding the areas of studies also takes into account the significant burden climate change will continue to put on communities of color and low-income communities. This is significant since the 1890's Centers for Excellence is meant to support BIPOC farmers as part of their work. Opportunities to expand into topics like climate resiliency and other interdisciplinary topics will support an innovative farming system that needs to adapt as our ecosystems keep changing and new farmers enter the system. Let's go on to the next slide. There are plenty of energy and forestry recommendations within the platforms we referenced so far. If you want to learn more, read the platforms provided on the resource slide of this presentation. Forestry and energy is a bit out of the scope of the Food Policy Council. Hence, we are not putting a lot of emphasis on the two titles. We combined the suggestions for each title, so there was still a total of 4 recommendations on this slide. Recommendation 1 is that Congress could create a new supplemental payment system for perennials. This is supported by NSAC. This recommendation means a whole lot of potential for the director of the Common Orchard Project, which is another program of Green Umbrella. This recommendation expands the concept of agroforestry to include perennial forages and croplands, and the Common Orchard Project's orchards are just that. The focus on perennial forages and croplands have been historically underserved in the title of forestry. If the recommendation is adopted, there is an opportunity for collaboration between the work of the Food Policy Council and the Common Orchard Project. Recommendation 2 is to expand the IRA and REAP grant programs. This is supported by NSAC. IRA stands for the Inflation Reduction Act. The USDA manages some portions of the IRA, especially concerning energy used in agriculture and rural infrastructure development. We discussed REAP in the slide about rural development, but since it's such a vital program, it is mentioned twice. This recommendation includes a call to define and then expand what is classified as underutilized renewable energy technologies. It would be nice if this occurs. However, there is not much confidence that underutilized renewable energy technologies will be defined in this round of Farm Bill reauthorization. Recommendation 3 is to reduce the carbon footprint by the federal government. This is supported by the American Farmland Trust. Basically, this recommendation is directed at federally funded infrastructure projects on federally protected farmland and forest. Though the land can be classified as protected, the government can authorize infrastructure projects to be completed on the lands. If this authorization is granted to build infrastructure projects, Recommendation 3 is meant to create stopgaps and caps on how much carbon usage and emissions a federally funded infrastructure project can produce during and after the project is complete. Finally, Recommendation 4 is to improve rural service utilities loans. This is supported by the American Farmland Trust. The recommendation not only pertains to the energy title, but also connects to the rural development and the credit titles. This is one lofty recommendation that would increase access for rural businesses and farms to build utilities infrastructure. So now let's get on to the horticulture title. We are almost through. The horticulture title covers the programmatic support and funding for urban farming and for farmers markets and other direct-to-consumer markets. Supporting these aspects of the food system hits close to home for several of the Food Policy Council partners. Recommendation 1 is to increase the available funding for LAMP grants. This recommendation was given to Senator Brown's staff and will hopefully be included in his local market marker bill. The Food Policy Council has received a local agriculture marketing program, or LAMP grant, and we can speak directly to the requirements of the application and reporting processes. Smaller organizations, including farmers markets, can find it challenging to meet all the application requirements, which limits access for these organizations. As part of this recommendation, there's the suggestion to increase how many mini grants are available to smaller organizations. Mini grants require less administrative work by the organizations and would increase access to the funding pool. The LAMP grant includes other grant opportunities such as the Farmers Market Promotion Program grant. If the Farm Bill increases available funds for LAMP, it could increase the funding for the Farmers Market Promotion Program grant as well. Recommendation 2 is to increase funding for the USDA Office for Urban Agriculture. This is supported by NSAC. The Office for Urban Agriculture is a relatively new office compared to other USDA offices and services. The Farm Bill could direct the USDA to increase its programmatic support and funding opportunities for urban farming programs. Recommendation 3 is to increase funding for value-added producers, which is supported by NSAC. If you need the definition for value-added products, please see the definition sheet in the resource slide of this presentation. This title can help value-added producers. What it means to be a producer is changing. Farmers must diversify their products, and farmers markets must include more value-added items to increase shopper convenience. The processing and packaging of new products take training, funding, and resources. Value-added producers are becoming more linked to our agricultural system, as seen in their involvement in direct-to-consumer markets, so additional support for them is needed. The new Farm Bill can reflect this by providing more funding and technical assistance to value-added producers, especially those just starting out. Recommendation 4 is to provide additional training and technical services to urban producers, and maybe even value-added producers. This is supported by NSAC and CFA. There's an opportunity for the Office of Urban Agriculture to grow both in funding and in the services it provides to urban producers. Let's go on to Title 11. Title 11 is about crop insurance. We discussed this several times, but crop insurance is interlinked with the commodity and credit titles. As a commodity crop farmer, crop insurance tends to be more accessible. In the most recent reauthorizations of the Farm Bill, directives to establish new crop insurance opportunities for specialty crops and regenerative agriculture were established. However, the programs are underutilized, so more work can be done. Recommendation 1 is to align the good farming practices from crop insurance with the good agricultural practices or GAP certification. This is supported partly by CFA and in full by NSAC. CFA is advocating for a more accessible GAP certification system in the state of Kentucky. Recommendation 1 could make it easier if there was a unified message of what good farming practices actually mean across the USDA offices and services. If a farmer reports practices for their crop insurance and GAP certification, it can take time to record both effectively, which immediately puts burden on the farmer's operation. Recommendation 2 is to increase access to crop insurance for specialty crops. This is supported by NSAC and Senator Brown. If we didn't make it clear before, the majority of the produce we eat is considered specialty crops. Tomatoes, zucchini, berries, apples, and more are all specialty crops. Private insurers can apply through the 508H process to create additional insurance plans. Connecting with local insurers so there are more insurance plans for specialty crop growers can be a regional issue. The federal government could also provide training for private insurers on innovative business models or farming practices that is inclusive of specialty crops. Recommendation 3 is to enforce directives for the USDA's whole farm crop insurance program. Senator Brown's agriculture advisor, Wes King, acknowledged that the whole farm insurance program was not implemented in the most effective way. Senator Brown hopes to improve the program in the next round of the Farm Bill reauthorization. The whole farm crop insurance was created in the 2018 Farm Bill, and it was an attempt by the federal government to address the exclusion of specialty crop growers from traditional crop insurance. However, the program was not advertised effectively and was underutilized. Additional directives from the 2023 Farm Bill can strengthen the program. Finally, recommendation 4 is to increase access to crop insurance for farms practicing regenerative methods. This is supported by CFA and NSAC. Farmers adopting regenerative, organic, and/or sustainable practices face the potential that their new methods could be deemed as risks during assessments and that their crop insurance could be dropped. No matter what, converting to a new method may result in an initial decline in the traditional concept of productivity. If the method conversion is done carefully, then the decline is probably only temporary and the farm could reap the benefits of adopting practices that don't require constant input of fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicides, etc. into their farm. Their farm could become a thriving ecosystem that can sustain itself while helping the environment around it. However, the long-term benefits of adopting regenerative practices go beyond the scope of a single farm. Risk assessments should be adjusted to include how not converting to more sustainable practices could result in significant climate change impacts on the agricultural system. The Farm Bill is responsible for guiding the risk assessments associated with crop insurance. We are moving to the last title, Title 12. The miscellaneous title earns its name for being a catch-all for other USDA programs. Remember the Farm Bill definition sheets, which outlines many USDA programs and agencies. Recommendation 1 is to instruct the USDA to create a navigator program. This is supported by NSAC. The suggestion to create a community-based navigator program was presented in the conservation title. If the 2023 Farm Bill creates a navigator program, the USDA could implement it more effectively by partnering with local nonprofits that are already helping farmers navigate the USDA programs. Recommendation 2 is to continue funding the Regional Food Business Center program and its grant. This is supported by NSAC, the American Farmland Trust, and even Senator Brown. The USDA created the Regional Food Business Center program as part of its rulemaking process in 2022 with the help of the congressional appropriations process. The program allows a major institution, like a university, to act as a hub, both literally and metaphorically, for regional food, with some money geared to best practice research. The Regional Food Business Center program can create a region-specific model. It is currently not a permanent program, so there's an opportunity for the 2023 Farm Bill to make it permanent. Recommendation 3 is to increase funding for the photo materials to be translated into a variety of languages. This is supported by NSAC. The Farming Opportunities Training and Outreach Program, or PHOTO, targets historically marginalized farmers, including immigrant farmers whose first language is not English. The available languages for photo materials are limited, and additional administrative and financial support needs to go into the program to expand language options. Here is another opportunity for the federal government to tap into the regional network of nonprofits that are already attempting to translate materials for new and immigrant farmers. Money can be directed into partnerships with nonprofit organizations as one way to achieve this recommendation. Finally, recommendation 4 is to increase funding and oversight of the 2501 program. This is supported by the American Farmland Trust and NZAC. So many programs could be running more efficiently. Many USDA agencies and programs are trying to support BIPOC and other historically marginalized farmers. More can be done by improving the programmatic infrastructure, which includes limiting abuse of the program's intended participants. I will mention a couple of more recommendations on the next slide, and then we'll move on to next steps. The additional recommendations mentioned on this slide are beyond the scope of a single title. The recommendations touch on several topics, but eventually will be written into a particular Farm Bill title if adopted by Congress. Recommendation 1 is to create a dedicated and hopefully regionally focused land access coordinator program. This is supported by the American Farmland Trust. Beginning farmers face obstacles in purchasing farmland due to its cost. If a USDA land access program is created, the program could be under the larger umbrella of a community-based navigator program. Placing the variety of navigators under the same agency of the USDA could help connect programs like insurance, conservation, capital opportunities, and training resources. Recommendation 2 is to create a USDA office for smaller farms. This is supported by the American Farmland Trust and NZAC. Smaller farms need different support than large farms, since smaller farms do not have as much quote-unquote wiggle room when it comes to budget, staff, equipment, land, etc. Creating an office that provides targeted support to smaller farms is an avenue for meeting their specific needs. Finally, Recommendation 3 is to utilize small farms and farmers markets as food hubs in domestic emergency procurement. This suggestion was presented to Wes King during a group meeting of farmers market managers in our region. The nutrition title includes directives and funding for domestic emergency procurement during times of natural disasters. This recommendation demonstrates that small farms and direct-to-consumer markets, especially farmers markets, can act as vital infrastructure during states of emergencies where food and farmers are available in one concentrated location. If small farms can be informed ahead of time of their inclusion in the domestic emergency food procurement process, the farmers can plan for their growing seasons accordingly. Directives must come from the 2023 Farm Bill to guarantee the involvement of small farmers and farmers markets in our emergency food procurement system. So, what do we do with this information? Well, let's dive deeper into the next steps. After all that information, now what? The most obvious things are contacting our Congress members on the Senate and House Committee on Agriculture or submitting comments on the individual committees' websites. However, we want feedback from council, committee, and network members too. What do you think should happen? How can we advocate for a farm bill that reflects and supports our region? There are a few things we should remember in the upcoming months. The Farm Bill should, if everything goes according to plan, be reauthorized by the end of September 2023. So advocacy for the Farm Bill negotiations can continue until a final Farm Bill is moved into Congress. The appropriations process, or AKA the budget process, occurs in conjunction with the Farm Bill reauthorization. The appropriations negotiation occurs through the end of October 2023. In addition, we can influence the appropriations process year to year. Advocacy can continue while the USDA implements new directives from the Farm Bill, since the USDA must complete rulemaking every year. So there's also opportunity for advocacy to occur at the regional, county, and city levels. The Farm Bill impacts the local agriculture system and requires management from the county, state, and city agencies and offices. So let's keep this momentum going to support a farm bill that reflects our mission of a resilient regional food system. A successful farm bill would support local producers, help food hubs and distributors flourish, and provide consumers with nutritious, culturally relevant food. This presentation has been lofty. Thank you and congratulations on getting this far. Here is the resource page I've been referencing. You can find the USDA and Farm Bill definitions linked along with the information from OFA and their two-pager. Also, we've included the NSAC and American Farmland Trust documents that include their priorities for the Farm Bill. I am not including KFANs and CFAs as there is not public record at this time. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you need links to any of these documents or other documents I may have referenced during this presentation. I look forward to moving towards a farm bill that reflects the needs of our region.